Well, hello, my friends, and welcome back to the Rewilded Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, Lydia Joy. Today, we sprung the clocks forward. It was daylight savings time today. It's Sunday, March 8th, at the time I'm recording this. And this is, you know, a genuine physiological disruption. Can feel however you want to feel about it, but it does affect your biology because your circadian rhythm runs on light cues and cortisol timing and sleep pressure. And when the clock shifts artificially, your body doesn't just adjust overnight, right? Most people feel the ripple effects for anywhere from a few days to a couple of weeks. So you might notice you're waking up earlier than feels right, like hitting an afternoon wall harder than usual, or feeling a little more wired and tired at the same time. Just something to be aware of as you move into this week in light of this change. And, just give yourself some grace with it. For me personally, today was a gift. The weather decided it was May in March. We hit the high 60s, and I spent almost the whole day outside. The garden has been calling me, woo, 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 and I finally got to answer. Got out there, got things prepped, ready. There's just something about getting your hands back in the soil after a long winter that just resets you. It's very on theme for what I want to talk about today, which brings me to this episode. What I'm sharing with you today is actually a blog post that I decided to record because I think it deserves to be heard, not just read. It's part of a series that I've been building that I'm calling my terrain map. It's kind of a Rosetta Stone style of body of work designed to help you understand what's actually happening ecologically inside your body. So this particular piece is going to get into a specific trilogy of our gut ecology, and I'll be going deeper on each layer in future episodes. But today, I want you to have this particular foundation because if you're someone who's living with long-term chronic health issues, inflammation, reactivity, or you're just feeling stuck in your health, you've got like 5 key things that are driving you nuts, or you've got some label. I don't know what it is. There's so many out there. But that you're just not able to move that needle, right? Nothing seems to hold, right? This matters to all of us a lot. So before we dive in, a quick word. This podcast is listener supported, and the best thing that you can do is to share it with someone who you think would enjoy it, or leave me a rating or review. You can do it in iTunes or Spotify. I know you can leave comments in Spotify, which is super cool. But if you could leave me a rating or review, I would so appreciate it. And if you'd like to financially support the show, that option is now available too. It's completely optional, of course. But there is a link in the show notes for you if you would like to do that. All right, let's get into it. Okay. So this is the blog title is Why Modern Bodies Feel Inflamed, Reactive, and Stuck. And I want to give you a terrain first explanation for what I'm calling like ecological compression, right? A lot of people tell me this is like a lot of people, like most of my clients, they say things like, I feel tight all the time, right? And it's not always just physically tight, though it's that too. It's like the fascia won't soften. Your shoulders live somewhere near your ears, your middle back, your thoracic has been locked up for so long. Maybe you've even stopped noticing it. You're tired but wired. You don't sleep as deeply as you used to, or consistently or soundly as you would like. And you just don't recover from things as easily the way that you used to, right? Another thing that can happen is foods that, maybe you think you used to tolerate fine now create problems, right? Like maybe you have bloating or brain fog or a mood shift you can't quite explain, or something else from eating food, right? Because suddenly you have these issues like, what is going on? I ate a meal and now I feel this kind of unfortunate side effect from just eating food. Maybe you've become more sensitive to all kinds of things, to chemicals, to the environment you're in, even to other people's stress and emotions. Maybe even you've thought like sometimes it just feels like you're allergic to life anymore, right? A lot of people they're functioning, right? They're getting up, they're doing their day. Maybe they're even high performing as well. But something just feels off in a way that's really hard to name and pinpoint. But it's kind of like you're operating with way less margin than you should have, and you can tell. And you've probably tried a lot, right? Like you've cleaned up your diet, so you eat clean, you try to take supplements that you think are what you should be, right? Maybe you've tried a number of like elimination type of diets or cleanses or specific protocols for things like cleaning up heavy metals or cleaning up mold or whatever. There's so many. And you've seen a lot of practitioners, you've read tons of books, you've listened to all the things, swapped out you know what I mean? Like you've done so many things and you know a lot of them are the right things. But what no one's talking about is you can be doing a lot of the right things and still have more drains than you have gains, right? So you have like an inflammatory load, a stress pattern, environmental exposure. Another one is missing microbial diversity underneath it all. And most people are completely unaware of how much their terrain is actually working against everything they're trying to build, right? And that's why the tightness remains and the reactivity is sticking around. And you just have this like sense of running on a narrower and narrower bandwidth, okay? And a lot of times people will like be like, okay, well, maybe it's a mindset problem, but come on, it's more than that, right? It's definitely your entire ecology. Okay. So that's where this concept of ecological compression comes in because we are not living in the same microbial world our bodies were built for, not even close. Okay. Um, Pre-industry, our ancestors lived inside layered ecosystems, right? Better soil organisms, wild plant fibers, diverse foods, even like, the ancient prepared, not ancient, but like I say ancient because it's like not something we do anymore, but like we would have fermented foods, we would have prepared foods in different ways, right? We would have had more microbial exposure through touch, being around more animals, being in the land in all the different seasons, being around decay and renewal, just like I was in the garden today. Like today, I spent a huge amount of time going through my compost. I had to sift out some of the large pieces, but I was able to spread compost over one of my garden beds, right? That was amazing. Anyways, so that's an example of being connected to bacteria, right? Our ecosystems pre this era we're currently in, there would have been a different microbial exposure and it would have been different inside our guts as compared to today. It would be kind of like more like if you were to compare it to an old growth forest, right? An old growth forest would be dense and diverse and resilient and full of keystone species doing work that we're only beginning to understand. And modern life has gone and compressed all of that. Okay? It just has. It's been gradual over time across generations since we've all been alive. We live indoors, we sterilize surfaces, we eat simplified processed foods that feed almost nothing in our gut. We cycle through chronic stress without the seasonal recovery that our nervous systems were designed for. We've inherited microbiomes already reduced from our parents and grandparents, each generation passing on slightly less diverse inner ecology than the one before. Okay. Then you add antibiotics, artificial light, sedentary patterns, built environments that recirculate the same microbial poor air, right? So, disconnection from soil, nature, all that microbial richness that kept our inner ecosystem stable for millennia. So, here's what happens when any ecosystem loses diversity: it literally becomes fragile. The regulatory signals that once kept everything in balance start to drop out. And then opportunistic species just fill the niches that the keystone species used to hold. And so the whole system, your system, my system, any human system, loses its buffering capacity. So, what used to be a minor disruption, like a stressful season or a course of antibiotics or a change in diet, now can create ripple effects that the ecosystem cannot absorb as easily. When I say ecosystem, I'm talking about your whole human system. Okay. You are an ecosystem. All right. And, recovery from that, whatever it was, takes longer. And people are telling me they have less tolerance for things. So they have a much narrower tolerance, right? So it's true of rainforests and soil microbiomes, and it's true of the ecosystem living inside of you. So when your inner ecosystem, we can call it your microbiome if you want, if that's easier for you, loses diversity, inflammatory byproducts start to take over and they can accumulate, right? So we can have certain bacterial communities when they either dominate or stagnate without regulatory balance can produce signals that drive immune activation throughout your entire body. Now, when those signals are chronic, the boundaries that are supposed to contain them, your mucosal barrier, your gut lining, begin to weaken under the load. Okay, so your inner ecosystem is not in disease by default. It's just compressed by the environment it inherited and has been asked to survive in. And compressed ecosystems, whether they're forests or gut microbiomes, respond the same way. They guard, they overreact to disruption, they operate on diminished resilience, and they just cost more to run. And this is why so many people feel inflamed, reactive, stuck, even while doing what they're saying all the right things. This is something people say to me all the time. That's why I have like Lydia air quotes when I'm saying all the right things, by the way. Um, people are frustrated, right? It's because the terrain underneath it all has been narrowed by decades, y'all. Decades, however long you've been alive on the planet, of ecological compression. And the modern microbiome, it didn't it didn't necessarily fail, it just adapted to the modern built environment. And that adaptation has a significant cost. So I want to get into what I'm calling the gut ecology triangle. So most modern chronic patterns almost always include three structural pressures, and they don't exist separately. They actually reinforce each other. The first one is low microbial diversity. Okay. So, most modern microbiomes are not like the lush, resilient old growth forests our inner ecosystems were likely once closer to. They're for an analogy's sake, they're more like a modern day monoculture, right? And we know that monocultures behave very differently than forests. They're fragile. They can't self-regulate. So when keystone species decline and their niches open up, opportunistic species expand to fill them. Species that were always present in small amounts, they were kept in check, though, by a diverse, balanced ecosystem. And at low levels, they're harmless. At high relative abundance, without their natural regulators, they shift fermentation patterns and produce metabolites that drive inflammation throughout your entire body. So, what low diversity means is that you have fewer regulatory signals. You have less functional capacity and less resilience to disruption. So, every stressor, a course of antibiotics, a season of poor sleep, a significant life event, hits harder and you recover slower. Okay. Then the second one is endotoxin load. Okay. So when your ecosystem loses your regulatory balance, the fermentation in your gut shifts. Okay. Instead of fiber and carbohydrates being fermented into beneficial short chain fatty acids, protein fermentation increases and it produces metabolites like ammonia, hydrogen sulfide, p-cresol, polyamines. These aren't like dramatic poisons, but they are byproducts of an ecosystem that's lost its balance. Okay. And the most significant inflammatory signal in this context is lipopolysaccharide. We're going to say LPS for short. And that's a structural fragment from the outer membrane of certain bacteria. So when your gut barrier integrity is compromised, that LPS enters circulation and your immune system responds to it as a threat every time, chronically. This is what we call metabolic endotoxemia or leaky gut. I have an episode on that in the archives, which is my most popular episode, by the way. So, metabolic endotoxemia, this is low grade systemic immune activation driven by gut derived signals. And it doesn't feel like an infection necessarily. It just feels like everything is slightly harder than it should be. Then we have the mucosal barrier, okay? When this is under strain, your gut lining, okay? It's one of the most important boundaries in the human body. I talked about this 2 episodes ago, I believe. Go back and check out the boundaries episode. We have that single layer of cells held together by tight junctions, deciding what gets absorbed into your bloodstream and what gets eliminated. Now, sitting on top of that lining is your mucus layer. And this is it's constantly regenerating gel produced by special cells called goblet cells. And this mucus is kind of like your moat, if you will. It keeps bacteria at the right distance from your gut wall, and it hosts your beneficial microbes. And it's the first interface between your internal world and everything passing through. So when that mucosal barrier thins from chronic stress, inflammatory load, low diversity, poor nutrition, environmental exposures, excuse me, sorry about that. Environmental exposures, um, things like medications, the selectivity is lost. And things that should stay out begin to cross, right? And then your immune system, living just beneath that lining, never gets to stand down. So these 3 pressures amplify each other, right? We got low diversity, it reduces the regulatory signals and shifts the fermentation in your gut toward inflammatory byproducts. Those inflammatory byproducts increase immune vigilance and then damage the mucosal barrier. And then the barrier strain allows more endotoxins into circulation, driving more immune activation and more ecological loss. And so the body responds the only way it knows how: guard, stiffen, allocate strategically. What's the word I want to say? Strategically. Um, your body will conserve, right? And this isn't pathology, right? This is not disease. This is your body intelligently adapting. However, when that adaptation goes on a really, really long time, it becomes what? Basically, you feel freaking exhausted from being on guard all the time, right? So that's the loop that many people are in. And what this actually feels like, it doesn't just show up in your gut, okay? It shows up in so many ways. It shows up in all the things that everybody's telling me they have issues with, right? You have tension, you have your fascia's tense, your connective tissue won't release, right? No matter how much body work you get or stretching you do or whatever. Um Headaches, like repeated headaches or head pressure. They come and go without like an obvious cause. Poor stress tolerance, right? A lot of people feel like they have a threshold that feels way lower than it used to. Another really big one is histamine reactivity, right? Like suddenly reacting to foods, wine, environments, scents you never reacted to before. Mood volatility that doesn't necessarily match your circumstances. Like you might seem to be having a decent life, but yet your mood is still kind of like WTF, like what's going on? Brain fog that can come in waves, right? Definitely like hormone uh instability. A lot of people talk about their variation of their hormones being what they say a wreck or a mess. Um for the women, it's more obviously related to our cycles, right? We may have irregular cycles, we may have PMS, we may have like crazy perimenopausal symptoms that just feel completely outsized, right? The other biggie is not something people necessarily can directly connect to, but a lot of people have poor bile metabolism and then they have sluggish digestion. And anytime you eat fats, this could be something you might notice. You might not feel able to eat a lot of fats, or you might feel your digestion slowing down when you eat higher fats. Slow motility, chronic bloating. So this isn't necessarily just constipation, but it's slower clearance. And then maybe you don't even feel bloated, but you feel full or you feel pressure, like a pressing in your abdomen, maybe a bracing in your diaphragm. And then sleep that's never quite restorative. A lot of people are having weird waking times, waking windows. They may sleep a certain amount, but then they just wake up and they're like, I don't feel like I got enough sleep. That's a pretty big one. Another thing that I think a lot of people are feeling these days, and it makes sense. We're in a world full of people, but social overwhelm, right, is another one. And where you just like absorb other people's energy and struggle to maintain your own center. So you can be functioning, you can be doing your thing, getting through your days. You might even be able to get a lot done or high performing. And you could even be seemingly healthy by most conventional measures, right? Like you have no pathology per se, but you could still be living inside this ecological compression that I'm talking about because this is not acute illness, right? There's no dramatic diagnosis, no clear pathology on any kind of standard labs, right? Like what's happening is more acutely described as chronic survival adaptation. The body's just running on a narrowed terrain. It's compensating quietly. It's allocating resources just well enough to keep going. And most people in this pattern have had the experience of showing up to a practitioner with a long list of symptoms and leaving with normal results or no real answers. Their labs, maybe they didn't necessarily lie or they weren't wrong per se, but labs that are designed to detect pathology They aren't designed to see this compressed terrain that I'm talking about. They're more to measure crisis, right? They're more for the acute situation, right? And so they are going to miss this slow erosion of resilience that I'm talking about. And so a lot of people just have to learn how to negotiate, right? Most weeks they're not sure what they're going to be up against. Will they have energy today or not? Will this food be fine or will it cost me in the afternoon? Will I be able to handle what's being asked of me or will I hit a wall by 3 p.m., right? Like people have learned to manage around their body rather than even be able to trust it, right? Like they've learned to plan for the crash or the flare or the day where everything feels harder than it should. That is chronic survival adaptation, and it's the lived experience of what I'm calling as ecological compression. And it is something that all my clients have to some degree. Now, I want to talk about your gut and how it talks to your fascia, because this is the piece that often surprises people the most. And it shouldn't, because the mechanism is really clear. When your gut barrier is permeable, the inflammatory byproducts that I talked about in the previous section, the LPS, the bacterial fragments, right, the metabolites of that compressed ecosystem, they enter your bloodstream, okay? And when they're circulating there, they act as that threat signal, right? So your immune system treats them as danger, right? Every time, chronically, not because it's malfunctioning, actually. It's technically not. It's actually doing what it's designed to do. So these endotoxins travel systemically, right? And they land on receptors called TLR4 receptors on your fibroblasts. Fibroblasts are the cells that build and maintain your connective tissue, your fascia. Now, under healthy conditions, they're going to be producing collagen, remodeling tissue, maintaining pliability and flow throughout your body. However, when endotoxins are circulating and hitting those receptors on your fibroblasts, something else happens. Instead of producing healthy collagen, they shift into inflammatory mode, right? And they produce cytokines. And that stiffens the tissue matrix into a guarding. And your fascia literally cannot remodel properly when endotoxins are circulating. Now, it's not that you need more stretching, more massage, more body work. Your connective tissue is receiving a biological signal from your gut to stay guarded, and it's obeying. Inflammation doesn't stay in the gut, it actually alters tissue tone throughout the entire body. Okay, and there's another loop here. All right, bear with me. Chronic barrier compromise, right? That mucosal barrier that we're talking about, it actually leads to the endotoxins in circulation, all right? I'm saying things over and over again because I want you to remember them. So the endotoxins signal the fibroblasts to shift into inflammatory mode, right? The fascia will stiffen. The stiff fascia will limit blood flow. Reduce blood flow slows tissue repair. Slower repair means the barrier stays compromised, and then you have more endotoxins, more guarding, all right? And the downstream effects of that loop are felt everywhere. So when your tissue's guarded and inflamed, your energy goes towards managing that load instead of generating capacity. And when your capacity is depleted, your resilience drops. And when your resilience drops, everything costs more physically, emotionally, and relationally, right? So the confidence that comes from feeling at home in your body, from trusting how you feel tomorrow, from being able to show up fully, quietly has eroded, right? The gut to the tissue to energy, energy to capacity, capacity to how you move through your life. It's all connected. All of it is downstream of that compressed terrain. Okay. So, what I want to say to you is this: your body has actually been doing its job. It's not been failing you, it's been compensating for the terrain that it was given. Okay. And that's the distinction that matters. It's a big deal because every symptom you've been living with, whatever tension, whatever reactivity, whatever narrowed tolerance, whatever fatigue, that doesn't resolve with rest, it's not evidence of like a failing, broken, diseased body. Okay. It's evidence of a body that has been adapting and compensating continuously and intelligently to an environment that has been asking way too much of it for too long. Okay. That chronic tension in your fascia, it's just compensation. Your connective tissue stiffening is a response to circulating endotoxins trying to protect you, basically. And so a lot of people are having heightened reactivity to foods, to the environment, to stress, right? That's also compensation. It's an immune system that has lost its regulatory balance, and it's just doing the best it can to manage a compromised barrier, right? A lot of people have like this exhaustion that just kind of sits under everything, right? Like it's just like you just know deep down you're bone tired, right? That's the cost of years of compensation. So when a system runs in chronic survival physiology, it's allocating resources away from repair and just towards immediate management. And that is how we get compressed, right? And that's how our resilience just narrows and we basically the margin shrinks, right? And what makes this particularly hard is that most of it happened gradually, not through one dramatic event, but through accumulation, right? Like, I don't know about you guys. I grew up on processed food, right? So a lot of us have, right? So that processed food childhood that shaped a less diverse microbiome from the start for most of us, right? Then how many of us took multiple antibiotics, right? They disrupt the keystone species. That's a big one for all of us. Chronic stress, right? Keeping the gut lining from fully repairing between rounds of antibiotics, for example, right? Living in water damaged buildings, all the chemicals, the environmental loads, right? Seasons of potentially impossible circumstances that cost your system more than it could sustainably spend, right? And your body just had to adapt to all of it, compensate through all of it, and keep you functioning through all of it, which is pretty extraordinary if we're honest about it, even though we don't love how we feel now. But the thing is that adaptation has a ceiling, right? The compensation has a cost. And so this compression that I'm talking about, if left unaddressed, just becomes your new baseline, which means the work that we need to do isn't about fixing what we think is broken. It's about understanding what your body has been surviving and finally give it the terrain, the resources, and the safety it needs to reorganize, right? Because repair is an ecological act. This is where most approaches go wrong, right? They go to war. They kill the bad bacteria. They try to hurry up and seal the leaky gut, detox everything, right? Like add 20 supplements, follow a protocol. But you cannot restore your inner ecosystem by going to war with it, right? You can't heal permeability under pressure. The gut does not remodel well under stress. It remodels when the system feels safe enough to change. So, repair being an ecological act includes multiple things, right? We need to have diversity restoration, right? Where we widen that microbial landscape again and reintroduce keystone species that are missing, which I promise you they probably are because I have not seen any single biome test where people are not missing a lot of species, right? And then feeding the ecosystem, we have to eat the right fibers, right? We need enough diversity. We need certain environmental exposures too, right? For our bodies to be able to restore that diversity. Then we all need, to some degree, some motility support because a stagnant gut can't restore itself. I'll get into this more deeply in another episode, but circadian rhythm support is huge, right? That's why I mentioned the the timing when we change the clocks at the beginning. Because these things affect our body's circadian rhythm. But motility is a big one. Where the movement of the entire digestive tract is so crucial, and a lot of people have slowed motility. And then we need to repair and rebuild the barrier. So you can support those goblet cells that I talked about that make that mucus layer, right, and give those tight junctions the nutrients they need. We also need to reduce whatever inflammatory load is going on because that's what keeps the barrier thin. We definitely need mineral stabilization, right? Because minerals are the substrate that everything else runs on. And without adequate mineral availability, your nervous system can't recalibrate, right? Your fascia is going to stay guarded, your hormones can't find their rhythm, and your gut can't repair. We also need to understand nervous system pacing because your gut lining can regenerate every 3 to 5 days, but only when your nervous system is in that parasympathetic long enough for those cells to differentiate properly, right? So, and stress is not just like this mindset problem, it's really a biological barrier to repair. And then we need the nature connection, right? We need soil contact, we need outdoor time, we need diverse environmental microbes, we need seasonal food, we need fermented foods, the right ones in the right time. That's a tricky one, right? Um, because your microbiome evolved inside nature and it still needs it. So, this is about creating the conditions, right? And you can rebuild, you can remodel and rebuild. So, if you're somebody who, you feel inflamed, um, you have a lot of reactivity in your body, or like this sense of like, ugh, I feel like my body is stuck. It's not random, it's not permanent. It's just that ecological compression expressing itself through your body as symptoms, as sensitivity, as tension, as diminished capacity, right? And what can be compressed can be restored, right? Obviously not on some specific timeline, like a 30-day timeline or some protocol you just do step by step, or, you know, outsourcing your body's intelligence to some rule book per se, right? It's more about consistency and structure and time and containment, right? And like understanding your actual terrain, not through the lens of pathology, but through the lens of ecology, right? And then we can build the conditions for your biology to reorganize naturally in its own sequence at its own pace, much like I've been doing in my garden, right? Like building the right conditions for the plants to thrive, right? And this is the same type of work that I'm doing inside of my minerals and microbes one-on-one client program. What we do is start by mapping out your terrain, right? So I use hair tissue mineral analysis to understand your mineral patterns, your nervous system state, your long term stress adaptations. And then I use the biome effects to see your gut ecology as it actually is. We're not pathogen hunting, but it's like a relational view of the diversity and the keystone species and your fermentation pattern and your barrier function and what your microbiome is actually producing. And from there, we can work together over 4 months to support the restoration, right? Not by force or any kind of suppressing. It's more about stewarding, right? Stewarding the body back, meeting it where it's at, and getting going with clarity, right? So, if you're someone who, if this resonated with you and you feel yourself inside what I'm sharing, you've been functioning in a more narrowed, compressed terrain for a long time, and you're ready to understand why your body feels the way it does and what it actually needs, this is where that work could begin for you. So definitely check that out. It's in the show notes for you. You can learn more about minerals and microbes below. I only onboard a few clients per month to make sure I have the space and time to work efficiently with everyone. So I hope that you found something valuable in this episode. I hope that it gave you some perspective. I think it's so important to understand the why behind where we are in our health journeys, so that it actually matters enough to us to do the boring, seemingly boring, but very important foundational work that it takes to really steward our bodies properly, right? Um, so that is all I have to share for this episode. There are going to be subsequent posts that follow up after this, right? So if you're into this and you want to like understand this, I'm going to be chunking it down over time in my terrain map. So stay tuned for future blogs and episodes. You can go to my website, lydiajoy.me, and search and read, find all my podcasts there as well. And again, if you like this episode, please comment, like, share, whatever feels aligned for you. I so appreciate it. And I hope you guys stay wild, stay well. Until next time, take care.